It's Wednesday, it's 11:15 and we're live in Westminster.
Like at any time, it's not OK to steal from Social Security. This is money we all might rely on.
Will taking away benefit cheats' driving licences prove a deterrent?
I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill.
Donald Trump wants more oil and gas. What will that mean for plans to tackle climate change here?
This is a big deal, merit. Our country is going to be based on merit again.
And the president effectively sacks federal employees working on diversity, equality and inclusion programmes.
Despite the fact that he'd been convicted for violence and was just 17, he was easily able to order a knife on Amazon. That's a total disgrace, and it must change.
The government announces tougher age checks for buying knives online after it's revealed the Southport killer bought his murder weapon on Amazon. That's one of the subjects that could come up at Prime Minister's Questions. We'll bring you that live at noon. Joining us today, Labour MP Nesal Chaliskan, Conservative MP and former Cabinet Minister Esther McVey, Fatima Ibrahim from Green New Deal UK and former Boris Johnson advisor Samuel Kasumu. This is Politics Live. Hello and welcome. Let's start with this headline in BBC News. Benefit cheats could be stripped of driving licences. The government's announced what it dubs the biggest fraud crackdown in a generation, with powers to ban benefit fraudsters with debts of over £1,000 and whom have refused requests to repay that money from driving up to 2 years. My opening question to the panel, starting with you, Nesal, is will it be a deterrent?
I think something's got to be done. It's part of a package of things. £7 billion a year is lost to benefit fraud. My constituents in Barking are fed up of people taking the taxpayer for a ride, and so I think it's a measure welcome. Right,
welcome, but do you think it will deter people?
I think it's part of a collection of measures, and we can't just put people in prison. There are no spaces.
Right. Will it be a deterrent, Esther, one that you welcome?
There's more to benefit fraud and benefit cheats than just this driving licence, and I will call it a gimmick because Labour has voted against, because obviously I was Secretary of State for Department of Work and Pensions, and you need to check claimants, you need to do conditionality. The reason you've got a benefit, you've then got to have sanctions and ways to get the money back. And we've looked at all of this, and Labour always votes against all of those things, even when we were turning the economy round and we got record levels of people.
But your party and government did have similar plans, didn't they, Esther?
Can I tell you, I'll tell you what they didn't have and why this won't work. Can I just tell you why this won't work? Is because it will trigger a whole host of other issues. If you take people's driving licence away from them, some of them need those driving licence to get to work, to pay for whatever they've got to pay back. You will be stopping them doing that.
What would you do,
It won't
then?
work. It will trigger. Well, first of all, I would have kept all of the things we put in place. So those are the checks. It is the conditionality. You have to adhere to this to get this benefit, and sanctions. Like I said, Labour voted against all of those.
Benefit fraud is a crime. £7 billion a year is stolen from the taxpayer, so any measure is a good move.
Right. Threat of a driving ban, is that enough to make benefit fraudsters think twice?
I mean, I agree with Esther to the extent that this is a gimmick, and the problem with gimmicks is they are not well thought through and they don't actually get to the heart of the problem. We've had the sharpest sort of growth in poverty in this country in 30 years. And so it's not just about going after the people who are sort of frauding the system. It's about actually coming up with big ideas on how we sort of overhaul our system to ensure that people are getting the support that they need. But what governments have done, both the Conservative government and this Labour government, is distracted us with side issues that make them look like they're tough on crime when they're actually too scared to go after the real inequality we have in this country, to mobilise the kind of wealth that we need to create thriving communities.
I mean, there are bigger issues, obviously, around welfare, Samuel, but do you think this could work in terms of deterring people?
No, benefit fraud is, as mentioned, it is a crime. So clearly, once you've exhausted all other avenues, then taking a driving licence is not going to be the silver bullet. And actually, I would argue, as Esther has, that you might be taking away the livelihood of an individual by doing such a thing. The bigger issue, of course, is the benefits budget overall, £303 billion spent last year. And so, yes, it's important to tackle this type of crime, but let's not get distracted by the fact that we have an unsustainable system.
Right. I mean, you must have been disappointed that it grew so much, the benefits bill.
Actually, under the Conservative government, we absolutely turned it round from 2010 onwards, like I said, and we were getting...
2010 to 2015, but then, of course, it ballooned again.
What we did, we got record numbers of people into work. We did take the benefit bill down, and we did bring in a brand new system. Now, during lockdown, I think that was where things went wrong, because people weren't coming in to have the checks and conditionalities, and that needs to be reversed round. But Conservative record on this is exceptional.
All right. Well,
Jo, what will get the benefit system, the cost down, is getting people into work.
Correct.
And getting them well. And
Correct.
so the investment in the NHS is what should be welcomed.
all right. Well, let's talk about President Trump. Following his inauguration, it's been a busy week, and he's been particularly busy. He's announced his intention to, which isn't a surprise, to pull the US out of the Paris Climate Agreement that was made in 2015 for the second time. The US will now have to wait a year before it will be officially out of the pact. But let's have a listen to this part of his inauguration speech.
Today, I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill. America will be a manufacturing nation once again, and we have something that no other manufacturing nation will ever have, the largest amount of oil and gas of any country on earth, and we are going to use it.
Now, the US is the second biggest emitter of CO2 gases in the world. If the US withdraws, as it is going to, from the Paris Agreement, should the UK, which produces less than 1% of emissions, be pursuing net zero policies at such a pace, Samuel?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, in my opinion, climate change is the biggest existential threat to our world. But Donald Trump is 78 years old. He will probably die by the time it becomes more apparent to people that this is a serious threat. Having said that, we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis, both in the UK and in the US. And so it's very important that leaders, activists do a better job at trying to carry people along. I don't think that this is a wise move by Donald Trump, but I certainly am proud of the record that we had when I was involved in government in terms of our response to climate change. And I hope that Labour continues to push this.
Right, but Fatima, if we pick up on what Samuel has said about the cost of living crisis, in the Daily Telegraph, the headline, British industry faces extinction because of net zero. This is the boss of INEOS, comes his warning after the closure of Scottish manufacturing site with loss of 80 jobs. So should the UK continue to pursue net zero policies at the pace it is now?
I mean, absolutely. The climate crisis is catastrophic, and the impacts of it is already here. We've seen in the United States what has happened to one of the wealthiest communities. No one is immune. And we don't just tackle the climate crisis because it has economic benefits. It certainly does, and I will get into that. We do it because it's a moral issue. It is an existential issue that if we do not take action, we doom ourselves to a future where we have runaway climate impacts, and the people who will be hurt most are the people who are always hurt most. The working classes, the young, the poor, the elderly, and particularly the young who have no sort of say in shaping the future that they will inherit. But the UK also has an opportunity. Right now, there has been never a better case for going towards a clean transition to ensure that we have stability and security in our country and move away from fossil fuels that sort of tether us to this unstable market, that tether us to regimes that we don't want to have political relationships with. And so it's a win-win both on the economy, stability, security, and it's a moral issue.
It's a win-win, Esther.
Well, the win-win was for Donald Trump. He won decisively to be president, and he's delivering on his manifesto, which he said increased standards of living, which he's aiming to do, and quality of life. And so he's delivering on his manifesto. People shouldn't be, or that's what he's hoping to do.
But my question to you is
it can't deliver on his manifesto, but Trump is.
Yeah, but Esther, I'm asking you a question. Is it win-win in the way Fatima has just set out to keep pursuing net zero policies, as outlined by the last Conservative government, and this this Labour government?
No, I don't believe it is. I think what we've got to do is be pragmatic, practical. The UK is less than 1% of emissions. We've led the world for 30 years. So I guess my question is, if we got to net zero, Fatima, what difference would that make in the climate temperature? How much would it be reduced by, and how much will it cost the citizens of the UK? No, that's the question.
What is pragmatic about not preparing for the future and incubating for our societies from the climate impacts that are oncoming, and also doing our fair share globally?
See,
we were the first country to industrialize. Much of the global economy is because of the design of this country. And what we can do to incubate from Trump is ensure the rest of the progressive
Jo,
world
can I tell
is
you,
doubling down on its climate
I never get the answer on that.
And that's the difference between now and 2016.
Well, yes, that's all right. Let you go.
If the UK went net zero, the question I keep asking, and people like yourselves who are proposing it cannot tell me, how much would it reduce global temperatures and how much would it cost the UK citizen? Those two questions. The answer, please.
And it has two parts. One is about global leadership and working with other countries
We've
who
led
are
the world for 30 years,
also,
and China isn't
Well, let her answer. Let her answer.
Are also committed to doing the same and creating that kind of global power. The other thing is about how we prepare ourselves as a country. What is the win-win is making sure that our homes are warm so that energy bills come down and we rely less on energy, making sure we have affordable public transport that people can access. These things are win-wins regardless of the climate crisis, and become more imperative because of the climate crisis.
Is looking at poverty right now. He's looking at his population right now and going forward. He's looking at what the rest of the world is doing, and we are impoverishing ourselves and pushing our manufacturing to China. In fact, it's hypocritical what we're doing, pretending that we're taking net carbon numbers down and actually pushing the wealth and the money elsewhere. So it's not working.
Right. Nestle, can I just show you this in the Times? Starmer refuses to condemn Trump's Paris Agreement withdrawal. What do you make of that? Should he be?
Well, it's not for a British Prime Minister to comment on domestic politics of another country, but on the issue...
Well, it's about the Paris Agreement, but it is about the Paris Agreement. I mean, it is about leadership internationally.
Well, we've said as a government, the Labour Party has said we're not withdrawing from that agreement. You've got to judge the government of this country and what they've done in the past 6 months, including GB Energy, the wealth fund that will drive low-carbon investment, reintroducing solar farming. Of course, there'll be things that we should be doing more. But, you know, to Esther's point about us being a small country and we shouldn't bother, that's not a reason why you shouldn't do things. And if we have led the way under multiple governments, that's something we should be. That's something we should be. That's something we should be
led the rest of the world. We have done more than anybody else. What we need to do, actually, is make sure that China, India, and America, not ours, doing it all, which will be.
And Esther, I would argue that that is a positive thing, and we should continue to do that. Not only is this about the climate, but it's also about energy independence and security. It is also an opportunity for a just transition. So as we move away from oil, actually we are trying to reskill those people who are working in those industries so that they have jobs for the future.
Right, but in the meantime, we imported 27 billion of oil and 21 billion pounds of gas. So what we're doing is just importing it from elsewhere when we should be getting our natural resources.
The government is doing clear we're trying not to do that as we go forward. Last year was a Conservative government, and this government is very clear on our agenda.
Let me come back to Fatima and Samuel, because the Institute of Economic Affairs found that in 2023 the UK had the highest industrial electricity prices, and that is also harming low-income families, as you say, 4 times higher than the US. Isn't that the big barrier to reducing poverty and promoting growth?
Absolutely, and that's why we need to think about energy efficiency and how we sort of bring down our energy costs by bringing down energy consumption. But sorry, I can't get over the fact that you said a Labour government will not comment on other countries' decisions. I didn't think it would be a Labour government that would fuel the end of internationalism. That global agreement was historic, and lots of governments and countries and movements work together to secure it. It's the only globally binding climate agreement that we have that secures our futures. And if Labour won't defend that, what is the point of a Labour government?
What I said is we won't comment on other leaders' domestic decisions. I think the Labour Party and the Prime Minister, indeed the Energy Secretary, has been very clear that we support that agreement. And like I said, we'd point to the decisions made in the last 6 months under this government that support the climate change agenda.
But Nestle, do you want to condemn the move by President Trump?
I think it's a wrong move, and I think our commitment to tackling climate change has been clear so far.
Yeah. I mean, look, the reality is Donald Trump, he had a decisive victory, and so the people of America, or the majority of the people in America voted for a particular direction of travel, and he's trying to deliver on that, and that must be respected. Having said that, I completely agree that actually when it comes to climate change, we are all very interdependent. So if you look at China, people like to say we're the number one emitters of carbon, and so they're really bad. But obviously, most of their products are consumed outside of China, right? So we're all interdependent in that respect. I always say when it comes to climate change, the most important thing is that you try to carry people along. And, when we set out the initial ambitions, both in 2019 and even before then, we were not in the middle of a cost of living crisis responding to or recovering from a pandemic, right? And so we're in a situation when people's energy bills are very high, where people are struggling to get by. And so the situation is far more complicated. But the objectives must also remain, which is obviously to bring down the carbon.
The world is reviewing this because at the last COP meeting, you did see most people weren't there. India wasn't there, China wasn't there, France wasn't there, Germany wasn't there. We were there. Lots of people were. No, they weren't. The leaders weren't there. The leaders weren't there, as in leading. They weren't there. So lots of people, I'd say, are reviewing this. Germany, France, etc.
Well, let me point you to this in The Sun in terms of what Esther has said about countries or leadership reviewing their decision or commitment to tackle climate change. Reeves, this is the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, to take on eco-mob, mighty Heathrow over third runway. Let's have a listen to something that she said at Davos. She's at the World Economic Forum there when she was asked about it.
I'm not going to comment on speculation, but what I would say is this. When the last government faced difficult decisions about whether to support infrastructure investment, the answer always seemed to be no. And we can't carry on like that, because if we do, we'll miss out on crucial investment here into Britain.
That does sound like a yes to the third runway. Samuel, you're looking sceptical.
That was factually incorrect, because there has been a Parliament agreement on a third runway. The reason why it hasn't gone ahead is because, of course, we were in the middle of a pandemic, which meant that capacity went down, that ownership has changed, etc., etc. That runway, whether we like it or not, is going to happen, right? And so this announcement is simply saying, well, let's bring it back up on the agenda. There'll be maybe a revised blueprint, but we need more airport capacity because that will help us on our agenda for growth. Now, my own personal opinion is Gatwick and Luton are more interesting places.
And they will be, the hints are that will be part of the expansion
but it's
too.
going to happen.
Well, you say that it was going to happen, but it hasn't happened for many, many years, and there's been a realm of sort of political discussion about it. Is it the right thing to do? Fatima,
it's morally and ethically the wrong thing to do. We were just talking about the climate crisis and taking people with us. The vast majority of people in this country do believe in climate change. They want their governments to take stronger actions. And this third runway would be catastrophic for our carbon emissions, but also there is no economic case for it.
Oh, really?
There are better ways in order to bring productivity. More people fly out of Britain than they do into Britain. We could be creating better connectivity around our country, keeping money and holiday money in our country. Currently, people are not able to afford to travel around the UK, and what we're doing is encouraging people to leave by expanding third runways that we necessarily don't need, and will not happen. For 10 years, movements and communities work together to keep our government.
Boris Johnson famously said, didn't he, that he would lie in front of the bulldozer?
Yes, and then he became Prime Minister,
I see what you mean. You mean he got a reality check?
Literally, yeah. I mean, the reality is we need a third runway, whether we like it or not.
But it's not compatible with our climate commitments.
Not just for now.
It's not compatible with our climate commitments, and I promise you, movements like ours will keep our governments accountable and take them to court if necessary.
Economic case for it.
Yeah, which is obviously factually incorrect, because we need, yes, we have access to things like internet, etc. But for us to be able to be a place where people can come and do business and leave, and also come on holiday, we need to increase capacity. That's just fact. And also, the third runway is not just thinking about where we are today. We have to think about where the world is going to be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. One of the things we do really badly as a country in terms of our governments is we don't make decisions for the future. And actually, if we want to future-proof our nation, we have to have an airport that is as connected as possible in London, and Heathrow is one of many of the things that we're going to have to do to ensure that.
You said you're going to hold the government to account. You just said in your last slide. How will you do that?
I mean, we have climate commitments. We have a Climate Change Act. We have commitments to 2050 by net zero. This government doesn't have plans that meet its current commitments.
And how will you hold them to account?
Movements will take them to court if necessary to hold them to their commitments and their promises to us.
Right.
The electorate.
Will you be taken or face taking to court over breaking the sorts of agreements that Fatima is talking about, air quality, for example?
Well, legal action will depend on, external organisations. I don't know, and there genuinely has been no announcement. But the government...
No, but I mean, the hints are pretty clear. And Samuel's right, it's been sitting there. I mean, actually, previous Conservative governments, Boris Johnson included, did reject it in the past, or they certainly put it on the back burner. But if it does go ahead, are you in support?
Two or three things. One, the government has been clear that our number one priority is economic growth.
Yes.
So should there be an economic business case for it, I think it is reasonable for the government to look at it. That said, there is no announcement, so I can't comment on that. The second is I would expect, as a London Member of Parliament, there to be high standards when it comes to if there was an expansion, but again, you'd have to look at the detail. But I accept an expansion of any airport, Heathrow or otherwise, is highly controversial and people have very, very strong views on it. But the truth is there is a capacity issue and it would contribute to economic growth.
Thumbs up from you?
Yes, absolutely. We are an island. How do we get in and off? We are a global nation. Therefore, we do need to expand and work with the world. So, yes, I am absolutely for it.
Why didn't
Labour's probably a bit more tricky as they try and go one way with net zero and then go in another as they're desperately looking for growth, as they've collapsed that completely with this third runway. You're right. The Conservatives did go backwards and forward. I personally would expand that. And I would also look for more airports along the coast. So things like Liverpool Airport, where you can go down the Mersey, is actually a safer airport. So I'd look at other things, and again, if international trade's coming into London, we want to make sure that wealth is spread around the country and doesn't just reside in London. So yes, using that third way to connect with all of the parts of the country.
All right, well, let's have a look at something else that Donald Trump has announced. He set his sights on DEI, diversity, equality and inclusion. Let's have a look at this headline in the Daily Mail. Trump obliterates DEI with new demand to place every federal diversity programme employee on paid leave by 5 p.m. today, US time, I think. Esther, are you impressed by this move?
Well, you've got to admire his boldness. He said this is what he's going to do, and that is what he's going to do.
But about the actual substance of it?
With DEI, I was starting the work in Cabinet on only having it to its statutory obligations, not expanding, because my view was value for money for the customer and also customer service, that being on the taxpayer. So I agree with cutting the DEI back, and I would move forward. The new agenda is MEA, merit, excellence and intelligence. You should have the best person for the job, not doing tokenism and quotas, and we shouldn't have one discrimination with another discrimination. So I would move on. DEI is in the past.
Right. I mean, you did try to ban civil servants, or certainly restrict civil servants wearing rainbow-coloured lanyards when you were Common Sense Minister.
Right, so, no, hang on, before you go further
I'm
with
asking
that,
you, yes.
Jo, before you go further, two
things. Or
didn't you? Let's just get to the substantive of this rather than you picking up again a gimmicky bit. The reality
well, it was your gimmick.
No, listen, Jo. Civil servants are not meant to be political. Any kind of badge or lanyard is political. Therefore, they would have a plain one. If a politician wants to wear a political lanyard, they are political. So I had said we wouldn't have any. I wasn't saying this lanyard above that. So if people wearing Palestinian ones, LGBT, it was no.
But did you get anywhere? My question was actually, did it work? Oh,
yes,
I didn't think it was included in the guidance.
Because this actually, if you look what was done, and this would have had to have been done by the cabinet secretaries in each department, of which had agreed, and the cabinet department had already bought in its plain lanyards.
Right.
It was so they were impartial. It was so civil servants were not political. Very clear message.
Do you agree with Esther, though, on the substantive, that this is the way to go in the way that Donald Trump has announced?
I mean, listen, when I speak to leaders and also a host of organisations, they privately confide that they are maybe quite disappointed with their return on investment when it comes to a lot of the EDI stuff they've done. So they say, in fact, sometimes the organisation has maybe had a review, had an action plan, and their environments are even more toxic post the investment in that. resource. So people are genuinely in private and in public maybe a bit concerned about the direction of travel. What I would say on Donald Trump in particular is it's very easy to sign an executive order, a lot more difficult to try and get 2.3 million people to behave in a particular way. And we had the same issue in government where, you know, before Esther it was Kemi Badenoch and other ministers who would try to change behaviours and in a sense found themselves playing whack-a-mole with civil servants who were doing X, maybe inviting a certain type of speaker, wearing a lanyard, etc., etc. You know, when you have that number of people in an institution, it's very difficult to impose your views on how they should
That's why I said
behave.
the Cabinet Secretary had to agree, and they did with me on what we were doing.
Fatima, is this something you're going to embrace?
I mean, no, and on a bigger picture, I think we need to stop now that Trump is back this conflation between British society and American society. Actually, there was a report by Oxford University last year that showed the vast majority of Britons are supportive of EDI policies, right? But I think what we're seeing is a backlash against this over-focus on language and representation politics. And actually what people want is a focus on the structural barriers of having more equal and diverse workplaces and societies. That includes education pathways, opportunity pathways, recruitment and hiring, as well as, like, I don't want to take away from the importance of language. I think most people want to be tolerant and not offend people, ensure that we are working in places where people feel comfortable to be themselves. But it's the over-focus on one that I think is obscuring the real challenge, which is the structural barriers.
I agree. I think there is a fine line between policies and initiatives that help to foster a more inclusive and fair meritocratic environment and the policing of people's views and language. And I think for very often why people are quite upset is because maybe there is an overreach and, you know, you do a training, for example, and that training is essentially saying, well, this is the language you're supposed to use, these are things you can say, these are the views you're allowed to have. And that overreach is probably why there is a significant pushback in many environments, or certainly in the States, but increasingly so, I must say, in the UK too.
Right. I mean, do you think that... Yeah, sorry, go on, Nessa.
Well, I was going to say, of course, it's not just about ethnicity and cultural background where we see things like a pay gap. You know, the stats in the UK show that there's a 12% pay gap for those who have a disability. Everybody accepts that people who secure jobs should be, their success should be based on merit. But the pay gaps that exist or their ability to be able to secure the job isn't about that. It's about them not being able to overcome what are, as other panellists have said, structural barriers in our society. And I have to say, I think there are also other areas we need to increasingly focus on, not least deprivation and access to education.
I mean, Esther, I think it was under Theresa May that companies were required to report on the gender pay gap within companies. Is that something that should stay?
I am somebody who believes in getting the best person for the job. I do not get hung up on, as I said, tokenism, looking at various sort of groups of people. I say social mobility, absolutely. How do we get, and I agree with Fatima, education is key. How do we, at an early age, make sure that everybody can excel in the way that they can excel? But we cannot have different targets and different levels of excellence just to get a certain quota into a job. And we've seen that in the army, haven't we? We've seen that in the Air Force. We just need the best person for the job, and that's the way forward.
Isn't the point that we're not getting the best people for the job because of structural barriers? So we know the evidence shows that if you apply for a job and you CVs with your name on, you are less likely to be called for an interview.
So have those blind CVs. I absolutely agree with that, because I believe in the individual and the best person getting the job and not on tokenism.
Because limiting the pool of people that you are recruiting from...
But I'm not looking to limit the pool.
Right, but is it happening anyway without EDI?
But you shouldn't be limiting the pool. You should let everybody apply, opportunities to all, and then the best person gets the job. But of course, different businesses will choose what they think is the best person for the job, and that's for them.
Yeah, but obviously, affirmative action for the avoidance of doubt is illegal.
Absolutely, that's not here. I mean, it was something in the States.
They have a slightly different context. Yeah, I'll end at that.
Oh, thank you very much. Let's have a look at this headline in The Times. Labour's tax plans. This is following the budget trigger exodus of millionaires from the UK. Since the general election was called, $1 millionaire has left Britain every 45 minutes. There are various figures to say that Britain has lost a net $10,800 millionaires to migration last year, and that is a 150% 7% increase on 2023, meaning it lost more wealthy residents than any other country except China. Now, the figures were compiled by New World Wealth, a global analytics firm for the company Henley and Partners, which helps the wealthy get citizenship abroad. Let's talk to the chairman of Henley and Partners, and that's Christian Kalin. He's been dubbed Mr. Passport for helping his clients relocate. Welcome to you, Christian. First of all, they're your figures. Where do they come from?
Thank you very much. As you said, we cooperate with New World Wealth, and they have very interesting data on people that actually relocate. We have very interesting data on people who obtain residence rights and even citizenship in some cases. They may or may not relocate. So the combined information we have is really very strong. And so we produce, as you, I think, mentioned, the Global Wealth Migration Report, where the latest figures show that the UK has lost the most wealthy people, apart from China. China is...
Why is that, Christian? Why are they leaving?
It's unfortunate the policies in recent years, not just with this new government, but also the immediate previous government, with the policies in the UK has just made the environment less and less attractive, but also including not just tax. I mean, people immediately think of tax, but, you know, the security situation is not the same like it used to be, other considerations. So indeed, there are a lot of people that are moving. And what is also interesting to see is that actually the UK, unfortunately, scrapped its immigration program for wealthy immigrants. So you also lose out, unfortunately, on people who may want to come to the UK, especially Americans. I mean, the largest single group of clients we now have is US Americans. And the UK would be a very interesting place to go to. But unfortunately, the UK government also made it unattractive for wealthy people to come.
To be frank,
you lose people and they don't come.
I hear the variety of reasons, obviously talking to your clients as you do, no doubt on a daily basis. But to be frank, it's mainly about tax, isn't it? Your clients want to avoid paying larger amounts of tax that they might avoid if they move to another country.
Yeah, I mean, tax is certainly a main motivator, but I always say it is definitely not the only one and not necessarily the most important. People like to be in an environment where they are and where they are happy and where they are secure, where their family is happy.
All right.
And unfortunately, all these factors, they have become less attractive in the UK as well. If you combine that with tax, of course, at some point, people say, OK, you know what, let me go to Abu Dhabi, let me go to Switzerland, let me go to Monaco, or let me even go to the United States.
All right. Well, we've got guests here in the studio who can talk to you, who could talk.
Davos here, so they just have these cowbells in the background. I hope you can hear me.
Well, we'll enjoy those if they come in the background, a little musical background to our programme. Nessel, do you want to try and persuade Christian to talk to his clients to stay in the UK?
Well, they're very welcome to. They just need to pay tax. And the Labour government was clear would get rid of the non-dom tax status. It will generate 33 billion pounds. You know, I'm more focused on the middle and low income families, certainly those in my constituency, 43% of whom live in poverty. Look, a corporation tax has been capped, so big business is still benefiting from the decisions of a government. I'm more interested, as I say, on those low income families, but alongside supporting them to see if we can secure investment. I support the abolishment of the non-dom status. Right.
Christian, what do you say to our Labour MP here?
What I would say the following is, you know, I completely understand this non-dom status is actually an anomaly. And I would suggest, if you ask me, I would suggest to not reintroduce this, but I would suggest to reform the entire tax residence schemes that are in place, that the framework, which is not terribly attractive. And therefore, you know, you can actually work with a framework that is a bit better than it is now. You don't need to reintroduce a non-dom rule, but you could introduce a very attractive program that, for instance, supports social housing, which is a big issue, affordable housing.
Is that something that you should...
And bring a lot of people that are very willing to pay tax. There is actually a big market for people globally that would want to come to the UK, be happy to pay tax if they had an avenue to invest in the UK and thereby get a residence permit. But unfortunately, it was not very well managed and then in the end abolished in the UK. So the UK currently doesn't benefit and loses out in billions, really billions of direct investment.
Right, well, hang on, let me put that... Well, that's quite a compelling argument, isn't it?
I have some sympathy. We have a complicated tax system and it isn't always a fair picture. So I do think there is some work for the government to do. But first and foremost was to sort out the country finances and secondly, to get rid of the non-dom status. I think there will be some opportunities to look at what can be a fairer tax system. But the principle that those who are the most wealthy should pay their tax in this country is one that I absolutely support.
I mean, Esther, what do you say? Because Christian obviously talks about the previous Conservative governments too, because obviously the tax take went up to its highest level on record. Do you accept that that was the start of some of this millionaire flight?
Well, we've all got lockdown. £500 billion to pay for. You're right, taxes did go up, but as a party, we would seek to bring them down. But can I just clarify? People do pay taxes. They are happy to pay taxes, and that's right. You need to buy into your country and pay for roads and schoolings, etc. But what they didn't want, and this was why Reeves's budget was a disaster, it went out looking for an extra £40 billion, and the employer's national insurance contribution of £25 billion has made people say, it is unworkable. You are squeezing us so much, like every Labour government does, and we are going.
Can we just come back, though, to this particular discussion? Because what's interesting is Christian... No, but yes, and I will come back on the budget specifically, but listening to Christian, who speaks to clients all the time about the reasons, there were other reasons too, and it can be said, I suppose, that the clients are looking at the UK and have been for the last few years at things like security, at housing, at investment. That was obviously the case before the Labour government came in.
And I will say some of those absolutely are right. I think that's why we've got to get a grip, as I would, on immigration, because there were various things there, because obviously that was pushing house prices up, that was impacting sort of health and schools and various other things. So I think there's a whole host of things, but it was... the straw that broke the camel's back was Reeves' budget.
Right, Vanessa, do you accept that?
Well, house prices going up was because the Truss government crashed the economy and inflation was a record high.
What about the business taxes, the increase in NICs on business?
Well, 75% of the income generated from national insurance will be paid by businesses who employ more than 250 people. That is true, that is a fact. So, and the truth is, we faced a £20 billion gap in the budget, and so Rachel Reeves had to take the responsible decision to stabilise the economy.
Let me bring in Fatima and Samuel, just to get a response to Christian. Oh, yes. Go on, Christian.
Why build it foreigners, that are willing to pay? I don't understand why any government would not want to have wealthy people that are willing to invest in the UK fill that gap.
Right. Well, Fatima, do you want to respond to that particular question? Because also the Institute for Fiscal Studies at the end of last year said the Treasury needed to be aware that if a small number of this super-rich group leaving the country, it would create a relatively big hole in its finances to pay for the sorts of things that the government says it would like to do.
I mean, there's lots of reports circulating around. There was one from PwC last year that said, actually, the UK is an attractive place to invest only after the US. It's the second most attractive place to invest. And so there's lots of people who still see potential in the UK. And I really appreciate, Christian, you being honest about the multiple reasons that these people are leaving. Another is that we have a failing public services. We have a housing crisis.
Do they use public services, a lot of these people?
I mean, the thing is, this government needs to buy us into a project that comes back to the fundamental purpose of our social contract, that those with the broadest shoulders take further responsibility in paying into this bucket that then means we all get to enjoy a thriving society that everyone benefits from. That's the point.
Can I just say...
It's been a bit miserable the last 14 years in this country.
It absolutely has.
And so is it any wonder you've got very wealthy people leaving?
Well done. Thanks for that. Can I just say there's a big difference between wanting to invest somewhere and wanting to live somewhere, right? And so, yes, it's still a good place to invest. Doesn't mean you're going to be based here.
No.
And the other thing is, yes, let's just be honest, the tax burden...
In any case, we have people lined up that are willing to invest, whether or not they live there or not.
Exactly my point.
You have people willing to invest in the UK that you don't let them do that now. I don't understand why.
Yes, but we're then talking about, Christian, I'll just let my guest here, Samuel, finish his point about people then wanting to actually live here.
And the tax burden is the number one reason why people do not want to live here. Corporation tax is fairly competitive, but then capital gains tax, NI, is going to result in businesses laying people off this year. On top of that, it's very important also to recognise that it's not just the super wealthy, who are, of course, net contributors to this country, who are looking at leaving. The squeezed middle, for those people who are on, effectively 60% tax because of the taper rate, those who, on top of that, pay 20% VAT for their stuff.
What you're saying, they're leaving?
Of course.
Yeah.
People who realistically look at their finances and saying, I'm working very hard, and actually 70% of all of my money is going into the exchequer in various ways.
Well, I agree with that.
They're the ones who are
currently
looking at ways for themselves to relocate.
You're not wrong, because of course people have been paying their taxes, contributing, and it's been going towards failing public services over the past 14 years. People generally are happy to pay their fair share, but when they want to be able to use the NHS, they don't want to have to wait 9 hours and they want to get their kids a decent education.
45 pence on every pound spent in this country is spent by the exchequer. And so this idea that we need to spend more money for more people to want to live here is for the birds.
Let me just get Christian. Hang on. Let me just let Christian.
That's not the argument I was making.
I'm just going to let Christian back in. He's at an unfair disadvantage there. Go on, Christian.
The big disadvantage is it's very cold in Davos and outside.
Nice and warm in here.
Christian, a final point before we let you go and warm up somewhere.
Yeah. Look, I would suggest, I think I agree with you, the taxes are a problem, but it's not the unsolvable problem. I think if the Labour government maybe revisits a few things, it could be sufficiently attractive for wealthy people even to move there. As I said, I think an overall reform of the general way you look at tax residence, this would probably be the direction to go. Like in other countries, for instance, you can spend 182 days in the country and not become automatically tax resident, like in the UK, where there's different ties to the UK. So this is an area to look at. But the other, I agree with some of you, and I know who spoke on what exactly, it was very, very busy.
No, of course. I know.
You have very important things like the first emergency medical response in the UK now is too long. So the health services... it's not good enough. And as a wealthy person that can afford things, yes, you can go to an expensive hospital, but if you have an accident and it takes too long for the ambulance to arrive, it's really not good. And then they come to, let's say, Dubai, there is no tax, the services work, the sun shines, and there's a couple other factors.
Christian, we're going to let you go back inside because we can see the sun is not shining behind you there, but thank you. Thank you very much for joining us today. It was a very interesting discussion. If you're busy, by the way, making lunch when this show is on air and can't watch on your TV, you can now get Politics Live on your smart speaker. Just ask BBC Sounds to play Politics Live. We can go into the chamber perhaps for a minute. We can see, oh yes, it's almost filled up ahead of Prime Minister's questions. Only a few minutes to go. Something that might come up today at PMQ shortly is the Southport attacks and the public inquiry that the government announced this week into the failures of the state and various authorities to prevent it. Let's have a look at this. BBC News headline, tougher checks on knife sales fast-tracked after Southport attack. There will be a sort of two-stage verification. A good idea, Samuel?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we looked at when we were in government, and I felt like the pace of change was not fast enough. Some of the knives, zombie knives, etc., we've put in bans and they're still on our streets. London is less safe in particular, but throughout the country we're seeing, I think a young man lost his life just yesterday as well. He was knifed by a 14-year-old. So this is a big challenge, and we're going to need some bold cross-party engagement if we're going to bring down the numbers of people who are dying like this. And obviously there are more challenges, but in terms of access to knives, etc., that's just one part of many things that need to happen.
I mean, it's going to happen quite quickly. This obviously in response to what happened in Southport and the guilty plea this week. I mean, there are existing laws already to prevent the sale of most knives to under 18s. I suppose the question is, will this stop someone very determined to get a knife, or is it worth doing anyway, Fatima?
I mean, I think it's worth doing anyway, that people shouldn't be able to access, or young people shouldn't be able to access these sorts of knives that sort of wreak havoc when they're in the wrong hands. But we also, like all things and everything I say, we need a holistic approach to these things, and thinking about how are young people being influenced by social media, and what are the other ways that are sort of like driving hatred in our societies, including the sort of rhetoric that we have at a political level that is having an impact in our societies. But this is a no-brainer idea, and they should move forward with it.
A no-brainer. I mean, the idea, Esther, is, and you probably know this, trying to buy knives online will face 2 ID checks, including providing identity document like a passport, as well as recording a live video to prove their age. Do you think this will go some way to preventing something like this happening?
Every step that we can take to reduce violence on the streets, I think we have to take. So I agree, we've got to do everything in the ground. There won't be just one way to solve it. Actually, interestingly, I got all of the freedom of information requests, and I'll go back to tax here, on employers' national insurance contributions, on how that will impact the police forces. And things like West Yorkshire are now going to have to pay 11 million more. That's the equivalent of 220 police officers. Greater Manchester, 12 million more. Merseyside, 7 million more. And I'm saying what Labour are doing with their taxes is actually going to make the streets now less safe. So you've come up with one initiative, but the biggest thing to have more police on the streets, employers' national insurance contribution, Reeves's budget has now made the streets less safe.
What do you say to that,
Honestly,
Nessa?
Esther, for you to talk about our streets being unsafe after 14 years of the Tories in power, when there are no police, where there were no police on the streets, where prisons were full, where the courts backlogs was out of control, where money was wasted, is quite unbelievable. I absolutely support the measures in terms of double ID. I think it's an important step.
If I might finish, Esther,
I support the decision. The Southport situation is absolutely horrendous, but I do think that is a particular instance, and actually that individual, I suspect, would have been determined to find a knife from anywhere. So we've got to be careful this sort of measure isn't seen as a fix-all for those kinds of situations. On the broader issue of young people accessing knives, a week barely goes by without me speaking or hearing about an incident, particularly in London. It's awful, and so I think there is a more complicated set of issues to deal with, but making it more difficult to access a knife is a good step.
Could Sadiq Khan have done a lot more as Mayor of London, since the figures are astonishing in terms of knife crime in London?
I think any politician can always do more.
Yeah.
He was a Mayor of London with a Conservative Party in government. I think his...
Oh, really? So it was the Conservative government's fault?
So was Boris Johnson.
I think he's targeted work, particularly around violence reduction units in certain boroughs, has made a real difference.
That was Conservative policy, violence reduction units, by the way.
But, local authorities play a really important frontline role. Things like children's services do the prevention work, and they have been under attack for a really, really long time.
Right. I mean, in terms of what may or may not come up, in fact, I think it might be time for Prime Minister's questions.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The senseless, barbaric murder of 3 young girls in Southport was devastating. A measure of justice has been done, but for the victims, the injured and the affected, we must see a fundamental change in how Britain protects its citizens and its children. As part of the public inquiry, Mr. Speaker, we will not let any institution deflect from their failures. Mr. Speaker, next Monday marks Holocaust Memorial Day. Visiting Auschwitz last week only strengthened my resolve to build a national Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre beside this Parliament. Mr. Speaker, the whole House will also welcome the release of Emily Damari and other hostages from Gaza. We must now see the ceasefire deal implemented in full, the release of the remaining hostages, and a surge in aid into Gaza for citizens. Mr. Speaker, may I also welcome Cheryl Corbell, whose young daughter Olivia was murdered in awful circumstances, and her sister Antonia to the Chamber. I've met them twice, and we will change the law so that most serious offenders attend their sentencing hearings. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in the House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before Christmas, I received nearly 1,000 handwritten letters from pupils at St. Peter's Secondary School in Exeter. Each letter strongly advocated for greater support to tackle the mental health challenges faced by young people, with many sharing deeply unsettling personal stories. I'm committed to improving local mental health services to help young people build the resilience they need to live happy and healthy lives. However, Mr. Speaker, I know these challenges are not faced and not unique to my constituency and are being faced by children across our country. So can the Prime Minister please outline what steps his government are taking to enhance mental health supports for our children nationwide?
Prime Minister. Well, I thank him for raising an issue of huge concern in his constituency and in all constituencies. Far too many young people are not receiving the care that they need. So we will provide access to specialist mental health professionals in every school, recruit an additional 8,500 staff to deal with children and adult mental health services, and roll out our Young Future hubs in every community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Marcus Campbell-Savers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend will understand the importance of farming to the economy of my constituency in Penrith and Solway and Cumbria as a whole. With recent reports of foot-and-mouth outbreaks in Germany and concerns being expressed over transmission to the United Kingdom, would the Prime Minister assure this House that all government departments are on high alert and vigilant in monitoring the situation, particularly at places of entry, including airports where meat import controls can be lax? We must avoid the disaster that this would bring to UK farming.
Prime Minister. Thank him for his question. We will do whatever it takes, Mr. Speaker, to protect farmers from the risk posed by foot and mouth. And that's why we acted swiftly to ban the imports of cattle, pigs and sheep and their products from Germany to protect farmers. We will not hesitate, Mr. Speaker, to restrict imports from additional countries if the disease spreads. We will keep the situation under close and careful review.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Bedlow.
Mr. Speaker, can I take this opportunity to welcome the release of hostages, including Emily Damari, from barbaric captivity? I also know that the thoughts of many will be with the victims of the Southport killings. There are important questions to answer, and I will return to those after the case is concluded. Between 2009 and 2022, the OECD found children in England rose up global league tables in maths, reading and science. Conservative government action means English schools now top the Western world at maths and reading. The Prime Minister's Schools Bill, which is being voted on in committee this week, reverses the improvements that made this happen. This bill is an act of vandalism. It is wrecking a cross-party consensus that lasted for decades. Why does the Prime Minister think that so many school leaders are criticising this bill?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it was Labour that introduced academies in the first place to drive up standards. Academies are here to stay and will continue to drive up standards. That's what the bill is about. But also in that bill are important provisions for protecting children, including a provision to stop abusers taking children out of school, a unique identifier to ensure the whereabouts of all children are known. What did the Leader of the Opposition do? She instructed all of them to vote against those measures.
He didn't even bother voting on that bill, Mr. Speaker. And he talks about safeguarding measures. That's not what the issue is. It's about the reforms that he is changing. We have an example of where these reforms were not introduced. Wales, which has been under Labour control for 2 decades. Welsh educational outcomes have tumbled down international league tables. Poor children in England now do better than wealthier children in Wales. This bill denies children the guarantee that their failing schools will be turned into a better academy. It is an attack on excellence, it is an attack on higher standards, it is an attack on aspiration. This bill is the worst of socialism, Mr. Speaker, and isn't it deprived children in England who will pay the price?
Mr. Speaker, as I said, we introduced academies, we're committed to them, we're driving standards up. But this bill is important because it also sets up breakfast clubs for the very children that she claims to champion. It limits the expense of school uniform and it puts in place vital protections for children. She has to answer the question, why did she instruct all of them to vote against child protection measures?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister thinks that he can distract people from what is wrong with this bill. This is not about breakfast clubs and school uniforms. Teachers and parents will be horrified at just how bad this bill is. Even his own MPs may not realise it, but the bill will cut teachers' pay. It cuts pay for 20,000 teachers. His Education Secretary says there is not a ceiling for pay. They're all shaking their heads. They clearly haven't read the bill. She hasn't read the bill either. Because Clause 45 means teachers' pay will be capped. Did the Prime Minister know that the bill, as it stands, will cut teachers' pay?
Mr. Speaker, we do need flexibility in our schools. And if she'd hopped off social media for a while, she would have seen the amendment that was put down this morning to achieve that end. But she says this bill is not about child protection. We had a young child killed who was taken out of a school by an abuser. This bill closes that gap. That is urgently needed. We have children who have not gone back to school since COVID. This bill closes that gap. She can make her points on academies. We can debate academies, but to vote against the bill is a disgrace on all of them.
This is nonsense, Mr. Speaker, and the amendment he's talking about does not address this issue. He raises academies. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Like every other parent, I believe all our children should have the best teachers. Apart from cutting their pay, listen to what the head of Year 11, Mr. Speaker, at Michaela, the head of Year 11 at Michaela, the most successful school in the country, came from the armed forces. The headmistress says that with Labour's new rules, she would never have been able to hire him. Those are the academy freedoms I'm talking about. This bill would have blocked that veteran from teaching. The bill implies that doctors are not sufficiently qualified to teach biology, that Olympic medalists can't teach PE. Why is the Prime Minister closing down routes into teaching when we should be opening up more?
She knows that's not right. No, it's not. Look at the provisions in the bill. But to say there ought to be qualified teachers in our schools should not be extraordinary or opposed. And we had far too many examples in our secondary schools under their watch of teachers missing when we needed maths teachers. They championed maths. We didn't have enough maths teachers in our secondary schools, and I want every single child to have the best possible education.
The facts speak for themselves. The standards went up under Conservative governments. What we need to know is who is benefiting. Mr. Speaker, everyone is asking who is benefiting from these changes. It's not teachers. Their pay is being capped. It's not parents. Their choices are being restricted. It's definitely not children. Their outcomes will get worse. So who is benefiting? It's the trade unions. The National Education Union sent out a tick list proving that after a decade and a half, they are finally getting their way. Why is the Education Secretary allowing trade unions to run her department and ruin children's education?
The bill benefits the children who need the nourishment of a breakfast club. The bill benefits the families that can't afford uniforms. The bill benefits the children who are currently out of school and nobody knows where they are. The bill benefits the children who could be taken out of school by abusers if this bill doesn't go through. She should change her mind and support these vital provisions.
The Prime Minister needs to get out more and speak to schools. I was at the Harris Academy just this month, and what are they saying? That this bill reverses 2 decades of progress. Imposing Labour's new curriculum on every school, taxing the education of children with special needs, excluding talented outsiders. The closed shop is back. This is pure educational vandalism. And alongside these attacks, removing single-word Ofsted judgments so parents cannot see the standards slipping. It is the same old Labour. Bad outcomes for all children, excellence for none. Mr. Speaker, I know what it's like to go to a school which didn't care about standards. This is a tragedy in the making. The key changes in this bill were not in their election manifesto. Isn't that because he knew parents and teachers would reject them?
Parents and teachers know we introduced academies. Parents and teachers know we're driving by standards. We're committed to them. They're part of the future. We will continue to focus on standards. And she talks about special need. She's got a nerve. I don't know. And they know it. Remember, they have asked me questions, these Prime Minister's questions, about the appalling situation of special needs under their watch. We're going to fix that mess like we're fixing every other mess.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Parents should feel confident that when their child is sick, they can take them to their local hospital to be treated as soon as possible. But last year, when my son was having difficulty breathing, like many parents, I couldn't take him to the Alexandra Hospital in Redditch, as paediatric services were temporarily closed in 2016 and have never been reinstated. As part of this government's record investment into our NHS, would the Prime Minister agree to meet with me to explore ways to enable local integrated care boards to reinstate critical services for growing towns like Redditch?
Prime Minister. Well, I thank him for raising this important issue, and I know he's campaigned on it for a very long time. We are putting, Mr. Speaker, a record £25 billion investment into the NHS as part of our plan for change. Building an NHS fit for the future means places like Redditch will see lower waiting lists and services that reflect their needs. Whilst, Mr. Speaker, responsibility over service rests with the appropriate NHS Commissioner, I will ensure that he gets a meeting with the relevant Minister to discuss the issues.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo the Prime Minister's opening remarks about the Southport killings and Holocaust Memorial Day? Can I particularly join him in expressing our immense relief at the release of Emily Damari and celebrate the fact she's back with her mum, Mandy, and the rest of her family. Let's hope we get all the hostages released as soon as possible and the ceasefire turns into a lasting peace. Mr. Speaker, last week I urged the Prime Minister to speed up the Social Care Commission so we can get the changes people need implemented this year. The very next day it was announced that the chair of the Social Care Commission was also going to chair another important inquiry into grooming gangs. So the Prime Minister says that the job of chairing the Social Care Commission is so enormous that it's not possible to complete it within 3 years. Yet he also says that the chair of that commission, Baroness Casey, has got enough free time over the next few months to chair another inquiry. Very good point. Can the Prime Minister explain how both these things can be true?
Mr. Speaker, Baroness Casey is well placed to conduct the audit into grooming gangs, given her hard-hitting report on exploitation in Rotherham. It does not, he raises the issue, it does not affect her work on the Independent Commission on Adult Social Care, which begins in April. But as he knows, that report, the first part of that report, will report next year, so we can deliver recommendations as we receive them. And he knows that already we're introducing fair pay agreements, providing more money for the social care funding, and putting up the allowance. So we're already taking steps. There'll be a two-part report. We will act on the recommendations as they arrive, but this needs to be done properly.
Sir Ed Davey.
I still don't think the Prime Minister is making social care reform the priority that it needs. It's urgent. And so I'm going to keep coming back to this and holding to account. But, Mr. Speaker, turning now to the United States, can the Prime Minister guarantee that he will not sell out Britain's fantastic farmers to Donald Trump in a trade deal that undermines our high food and animal welfare standards in the way that the Conservatives sold them out in the Australia and New Zealand deals?
Mr. Speaker, we will work with the US, we will work with other countries, but we will never lower our standards.
Durham Puffey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, thousands of my constituents across Southampton Itchen have had to put up with years of misery because of unsafe fire protection in their own homes, developers dragging their feet and leaseholders having to foot the bill for mistakes they didn't make. Does the Prime Minister agree that enough is enough and it's time for developers to make all homes safe? Yes. And will he reassure leaseholders who bought their homes in good faith that this government has their back?
Prime Minister. I thank him for raising this really important issue. Too many buildings are still unsafe and the speed of delivery has been far too slow. Our action plan sets out measures to identify buildings at risk and fix them faster. And my message, Mr. Speaker, is clear. The funding is there to fix this, and there's no excuse not to deliver for residents.
Adrian Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Expanding London's airports and building a third runway at Heathrow would be incredibly irresponsible in the midst of a climate emergency, flying in the face of the Climate Change Committee's advice. The Prime Minister clearly knows this because he and 7 Cabinet colleagues voted against a third runway at Heathrow in 2018. So can the Prime Minister confirm what is his position now?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to comment on speculation. He knows that we are, as a government, we are committed to growth, we're committed to the aviation sector and to our climate obligations. But I'm not going to take lectures from those who talk about climate change but oppose vital renewable infrastructure in their own constituency.
Solar farms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Swindon North, we have the Panettone Park development. It is one of the largest employment developments in Europe. It's got massive potential for growth. Will the Prime Minister join me in acknowledging the site for boosting economic growth in not only my region, but the country, and will he come and visit it with me? Thank you.
Prime Minister.
At the heart of our plan for change is growth, Mr. Speaker, to fund our public services, create good jobs and raise living standards across the country. He's right to champion one of the largest brownfield sites in the UK, which could create over 11,000 jobs on site and add £1.2 billion to the economy. It underlines the importance of this government bringing economic stability, creating the National Wealth Fund and driving up growth.
Luke Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, the Prime Minister visited Epsom Hospital, where he committed to not just paper over the cracks in the NHS after years of Conservative lies. Yet on Monday, his government confirmed that our St Helier Hospital will develop these wounds and the hospital will crumble. Mr. Speaker, St Helier Hospital will not survive the delay this has introduced. People will die and NHS staff will break. So I ask the Prime Minister, will he apologise to my constituents as they wait years for a new hospital building? And will he visit the hospital with me to witness firsthand the dire situation our residents face?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he's right to raise the concerns of his constituents, and I'm not surprised that they're frustrated or even angry at the lack of delivery under the previous government. There was no credible plan. Mr. Speaker, they shut. Let me read the Infrastructure and Projects Authority's verdict on what we inherited. This is their words. There are major issues.
Prime Minister. Mr. Philp, I expect better from the front bench, and I'm sure you're going to show better, Prime Minister.
I think he was Liz Truss's right-hand man, so we wouldn't expect anything else. The verdict on the plan that he is talking about was this. Major issues, this is their record, they shouldn't be chuckling, major issues on the definition, the schedule, the budget, the quality and the delivery. It was a fiction, always was.
Jo Platt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Alongside Greater Manchester MPs, I recently met constituents who shared distressing accounts of malpractice by a spinal surgeon affecting many across the region. They have formed an injured staff and patient group, but despite a review, they feel justice hasn't been served and the Hospital Trust is yet to conduct a full patient recall. Will the Prime Minister arrange a meeting with the group and the relevant minister to help them get the justice that they deserve?
Well, I thank her for raising this awful case, and the stories and accounts that she puts forward are heartbreaking and deeply concerning, and I will make sure that she and the group receive a meeting with the relevant health minister at the earliest opportunity.
Sir Bernard.
When it comes to his budget, which raised taxes, raised borrowing and raised public spending as a strategy for economic growth, when is the Prime Minister going to accept the words of the Labour Prime Minister in the 1970s, who explained to a Labour conference that in all candour that option no longer exists, and that the only way to obtain sustained economic growth will be by cutting taxes and cutting regulation?
Prime Minister.
Well, he must have missed recent reports. The ONS has just said that we've got the highest investment for 19 years. The PwC have just said that this is the second best place to invest in the world. The IMF have just upgraded growth, now saying we're predicted to be the fastest growing major European economy. Wages are up and inflation is down. That's after just 6 months.
Lucy Writing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Kettering General Hospital is where I was born and cared for as a premature baby. But after 14 years of the Conservatives underfunding the NHS, that same maternity ward is partially closed because of RAC. And after giving birth, mothers are transported outside through the car park to receive postnatal care. So will the Prime Minister visit Kettering General to discuss how we can support services like the maternity ward and while we await our rebuild?
Prime Minister. Well, she's been a determined champion of Kettering General Hospital, and rightly so. And there are deep anger about the delay to the works because of the failure to have a plan on the party opposite. But while we implement our affordable and deliverable plan to build a new hospital, I can reassure her, Mr. Speaker, that the RAC identified at Kettering General is being mitigated and replaced through the National RAC programme.
Mike Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before Christmas, Lord Robertson, who's leading the Strategic Defence Review, came before the Defence Select Committee and told us that he couldn't guarantee that the strategic outcomes from the review would be fully funded. Recently, we've also heard in media reports that the review might be delayed until the autumn, so that's a delay of 6 months. Will the Prime Minister take this opportunity to state categorically to the House that the Strategic Defence Review, with its important requirements for the defence of our nation, will be fully funded and delivered on time?
Prime Minister.
Of course, we're committed to that because this is a serious review into our defence. It needs to make sure that we understand the challenges we face and have the capability to deal with those challenges in the modern era. So that's the exercise that's going through. We've committed to the path to 2.5%. As he knows, the last time 2.5% was spent on defence was under the last Labour government. And that is the difference between the approach on this side of the House and the approach on that side of the House.
Harpreet Apple.
Huddersfield Royal Infirmary has recently reduced its elective waiting list from a high of 4,000 to just 20. Will the Prime Minister join me in paying tribute to NHS staff at my local hospital? Will he ensure that the NHS learns from the HRI's innovative approaches, such as the use of AI for scans and its partnership with Huddersfield University's National Health Innovation Campus? And whilst the Prime Minister does his hospital tour, can I also invite him to Huddersfield to see the transformative work being done?
Prime Minister. Look, can I thank her because the achievements of the hard-working staff at Huddersfield Royal Infirmary prove that you can bring down waiting times through our plan for change. And it is important we're applying that best practice and innovation across the NHS. We must do more. We inherited record waiting lists, and we are now bringing them down.
Andrew Snowden.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. In what is supposed to be a honeymoon period for a new government, the Prime Minister has sacked his Chief of Staff, forced his City Minister and Transport Secretary to resign, whilst Number 10 has been briefing against the Pensions Secretary, Home Secretary and Education Secretary. Is it not time that the Prime Minister accepts that the root causes at the heart of this government are with him, not them?
We just won a landslide victory. We've got a massive majority. We're getting on with the job. And Mr. Speaker, I don't think we saw. Look at the sheer number of ministers that they got through on a yearly basis, causing instability in every conceivable department.
Paul Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2016, I was diagnosed with colon cancer and had excellent treatment at Huddersfield Royal Infirmary. I was one of the lucky ones, as the Tory governments after 2015 failed in the fight against cancer, with over 380,000 patients in England not treated on time. What assurance can the Prime Minister offer Colne Valley residents that the reforms and extra investment he's announced will address this issue?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I start by wishing him a speedy recovery from his recent treatment and thank the doctors and nurses who treated him. Under the previous government, there was no progress made in diagnosing cancer at stage 1 and 2 between 2013 and 2021. That is an appalling inheritance. We are spending £1.5 billion on new surgical hubs and diagnostic scanners to ensure cancer patients get the care that they need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Eating disorders are the mental health disorder with the highest mortality rate. We have 1.2 million sufferers at least. Some are being told that they are now too ill to be treated, yet eating disorders are entirely treatable. Today, the Eating Disorder APPG is publishing its report of how to make eating disorder services fit for purpose. Can I ask the Prime Minister to pay very close attention to that report?
Prime Minister.
Can I start by recognising her dedicated work and campaigning on this issue for many years. NHS England is expanding eating disorder treatment services, including crisis care and intensive home treatment. And as she knows, the Online Safety Act will prevent children from encountering harmful content that promotes eating disorders to services. And we will look very carefully, obviously, at the report that is being published and consider its recommendations.
Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the past few days, Luton has suffered 2 stabbings, as well as 1 woman murdered, another seriously injured, and a manhunt is currently underway for the suspect. This January alone, there has been at least 12 recorded violent offences in Luton. After decades of being funded as a rural police force, Bedfordshire has had to make do with special grants to tackle serious and violent crime. Does the Prime Minister agree that proper police funding is essential for keeping people in Luton North safe? And will he ensure Bedfordshire Police receive the grants we need to fight crime on our streets?
Well, I thank you for raising this case. And she and I have met far too many families devastated by this senseless violence. We are taking urgent action to ban zombie-style knives and regulating the online sale of knives. It is unacceptable that these murder weapons can be bought with 2 clicks. Technology is there to stop it, and we're going to take action. And on the resources, we're putting an additional 13,000 police into neighbourhood roles and allocating £85 million to Bedfordshire Police in funding to keep her constituents safe.
Iqbal Mohammed.
Mr. Speaker, may I associate with the remarks from the Prime Minister regarding the ceasefire and the release of hostages, and let's all pray that the remaining hostages on both sides are released as soon as possible. Since the ceasefire in Gaza came into effect, Israeli forces have placed the whole of the West Bank under strict military inspection as part of the Iron Wall operation. The IDF has launched a large-scale offensive operation in the city of Jenin, with numerous drone strikes on the infrastructure and a military raid by IDF troops and special forces in the occupied West Bank. At least 9 people have been killed by Israeli forces and 40 people injured, including several healthcare workers. What steps is the government taking to urgently protect Palestinians, including healthcare workers, and to prevent atrocities in the West Bank? And will he outline the UK's response to the ICJ advisory opinion on Israel's unlawful occupation?
Minister.
I'm deeply concerned by what's happening in the West Bank. And we've raised it a number of times in the various exchanges that we've had, but I am deeply concerned about it, and we're doing everything we can to alleviate the situation.
Sarah Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tamworth Castle, boasting 1,000 years of history, was recently added to the Heritage at Risk Register following my campaign about its future. Despite needing repairs, it provides a unique and valuable learning environment, welcoming both the public and schools to learn about Tamworth's rich history. Will the Prime Minister come and visit Tamworth Castle to see how an 11th century castle is providing 21st century learning opportunities whilst promoting local heritage?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank you for a kind invitation? I particularly enjoyed Tamworth's recent FA Cup heroics against Tottenham, albeit they didn't quite win. Mr. Speaker, we are committed to protecting our most vulnerable heritage, and I know Historic England is working closely with Tamworth Borough Council to preserve this local treasure for future generations. It's particularly important to continue school visit programmes supporting our mission to get every child the best opportunities in life.
Alison Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Across England, there are 95,000 students who attend non-academised sixth form colleges. Of those colleges, 32 are currently on strike because the government didn't settle the funding for them back in last summer. I wonder, could the Prime Minister tell me whether he intended to create a two-tier education system for sixth form students who are the victims of the COVID crisis?
Prime Minister.
We have put more money into colleges, and it's really for them to deal with these disputes, as she knows.
Lee Ingham.
Mr. Speaker, from Stafford to Eccleshall to Loggerheads, my constituents are sick and tired of having their properties and businesses devastated by flooding. The last Conservative government did not invest enough in flood prevention measures to stop this from happening. Can the Prime Minister assure me and my constituents that he will prioritise flood prevention investment before the homes and businesses on Sandon Road in Stafford disappear completely into Sandyford Brook?
Prime Minister.
Well, my sympathies go to her constituents. Far too many are experiencing terrible flooding. I visited there last year and met them, and they talked me through the misery of their experience. We inherited flood defences in their worst condition on record. We are now investing £2.4 million in flood defences to better protect communities, and committed £60 million to support farmers impacted by the extreme weather.
Rebecca Smith.
Two-year mortgages have hit 5%. Borrowing is billions above forecast. Retail sales have slumped. Does the Prime Minister still believe the Chancellor is doing a good job?
I thought she was just reading out their last record.
Final question, Mark Turmin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Excuse me. Before the last election, the Conservatives baselessly promised a fully funded scheme to deliver a new Watford hospital, something they have failed to achieve in 14 years. Does the Prime Minister share my frustration and that of my constituents that they unforgivably failed to budget for its construction, and Watford will only get its new hospital built and paid for thanks to the properly planned approach of this Labour government?
I'm not surprised his constituents are frustrated. There was never a plan. The funding only ever existed in Boris Johnson's imagination. It was pure fiction, and they know it. We have an affordable and delivery plan to build these new hospitals, and that includes Watford General, and we'll be getting on with it.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.
That brings us to the end of Prime Minister's questions, as announced there by the Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle. Let me introduce our guests for this part of Politics Live. For the Government, the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy. For the Conservative, Shadow Education Secretary, Laura Trott. And Vicki Young, the BBC's Deputy Political Editor. Well, Kemi Badenoch, the opposition leader, focused all of her questions on the Schools and Wellbeing Bill. She called it an act of vandalism in terms of what she sees as being proposed by the Labour government, particularly the changes around academies. The government, and Keir Starmer, said the bill protects children and encouraged Kemi Badenoch and the Conservative to support it. What's going on here, Vicki?
Well, I thought it was interesting, first of all, that the Conservative leader took a different approach. She used all 6 questions to focus on one issue. I thought her questions were shorter, they were more to the point, and I think it worked for her in the sense that she got her message across.
It was more forensic, wasn't it?
Yeah, and when you look at the schools bill, this has been causing a few ripples around Parliament in the last couple of weeks. I mean, there's 2 parts to it. There's the safeguarding element, which Sir Keir Starmer really wanted to focus on. That's about the kids who aren't turning up at school. It's about kids being taken out for homeschooling who maybe shouldn't be, and it's saying that councils, have to have really more tabs on them. There's the other side to it, as you said there. It's about the role of academies and really the freedoms that they have enjoyed over the last few years. Now, there's things like failing schools under Michael Gove's reforms had to become academies. That will no longer be the case. Other freedoms include being able to vary the national curriculum up to a point. That will be limited as well. But the very controversial part of this is about teachers' pay, because up until now, academies have been allowed to not follow those pay scales. They can pay more to teachers. They can have teachers who aren't qualified coming into the school. So the example being given there was, a former Olympic champion could come in and teach PE. They're saying that that will now be stopped. The controversy really is about the teachers' pay. There's actually got to the point where the government is putting down its own amendment to clarify. They say that there will not be a cap on the pay that academies can give to teachers. There will be a floor, and they will have to show due regard to national pay scales, but they won't have to follow them. So that is where the controversy is, where Kemi Badenoch is saying it's going to mean that the pay will be cut for 20,000 teachers.
Lisa, what's the problem that this government is trying to fix when it comes to academy schools?
Well, we inherited serious shortages in the teaching workforce. It's not just that the last government had real challenges in recruiting teachers into subjects like physics, music, maths and other areas, but we also had a lot of teachers leaving the profession over the 14 years that they were in government, which is why we came to office with a pledge to recruit and train 6,500 more teachers. Now, what we've done with this bill is make sure that there is a floor, not a ceiling, on the amount that teachers are paid, rather than creating a marketplace where schools are competing over an inadequate supply of teachers. We've launched a campaign. We're getting more teachers into the profession. We're working closely with the teaching profession rather than treating them as enemies. More of them are staying, and we're making sure that there is a floor on what they can be paid, so that there's one set of standards and that teachers aren't in this bidding war where children lose.
So, Laura, what's the problem? There is no cap. There's no ceiling on teachers' pay, which is one of the things that Kemi Badenoch referred to. Do you accept that that's been, if not remedied, it's certainly been clarified?
Well, I think what is very obvious from today is that both the Prime Minister and Bridget Phillipson either hadn't read or didn't understand their bill before they introduced it into the House of Commons. We have been saying for weeks that what is the result of this bill, and it's very clearly set out in the bill, is that it caps teachers' pay in academies. That was flat out denied. For weeks. On the floor of the House, it was denied. But what is clear now is that they are acting to U-turn on this because of pressure from us, but also from academy heads. We will look at what is being proposed and check it goes far enough.
And if it does, are you happy?
But no, there is so much more in this. This is a dreadful bill. It undermines 2 decades of education consensus, which has led to English children being the best at reading and at maths in the Western world. And for what?
But what's going to damage that in these changes? If we accept, let's put the pay to one side. Yep. Let's accept that that's been sort of dealt with to a certain extent. What else is going to damage that performance that you see as leading in the Western world?
So, for example, the academy order, which means that failing schools automatically have to become academies, is being rescinded by this bill. This is incredibly damaging. It means that it will take ages for failing schools to be turned around, if they are at all. And it's not just us saying this. Siobhan Madonna, a very brave backbench Labour MP, has come forward to say this will be an absolute disaster. An absolute disaster. So we're keeping the pressure up because, as I said, from today, it's very obvious that actually the Prime Minister doesn't understand the education elements of this bill. The safeguarding bits, we absolutely support.
Well, yes, but you're not going to support them, are you?
No, but we have to make sure that this bill does not wreck education standards in this country.
All right,
it is incumbent on us to do that. If they want to bring the bill back with just the safeguarding elements in, we will support it, absolutely.
Oh, well, there you go. There's a promise there from the Shadow Education Secretary. But in terms of what Laura Trott says is disastrous, this issue of failing schools that were forced to become academies, why are you changing that?
I just think it's a really bizarre argument from the Conservative Party that only academies can succeed. We've got examples of really great schools across the board that follow different models. And what we're doing is giving choice and flexibility and power to parents, to children and to communities in order to decide how to turn schools around that are failing. And I'm glad that there's an admission that some schools are failing after 14 years of underinvestment from the Tory government. But look, I just say this as well. This whole attack seems to me to be contrived and clutching at straws.
What?
Because the truth is, last week, Kemi Badenoch was having a go at the Labour government for paying public sector workers too much. And this week, she gets up at the dispatch box and has a go at us because she says we're paying people too little. You've opposed every single measure to raise money in the budget, and now you're telling us we're not paying people enough. I genuinely cannot understand where this Conservative Party is coming from.
Comes
you have no answers to the challenges this country faces. Challenges that you created for our children.
You're creating problems in a school system which has turned out the best readers in the Western world.
Can we just
compare it to Wales? Where we've I listened to you very carefully.
Let's just in Wales, and then let me correct you on
yes,
that.
all right.
So
well, let Laura finish and I'll...
In Wales, where we haven't had the academy reforms and they have done a different skills-based curriculum, English children now, the deprived children are outperforming the average children in Wales. Right? We've shown the impact that our changes will have and the impact that they are having. Why undermine them? Why? It doesn't make any sense.
Lisa, do you want to challenge? And then I'll show you a graph on maths.
This sort of glowing record that the Conservative Party claims that they have, because it's absolutely right to say that the UK has risen up the league tables.
Yep.
But the reason that the UK has risen up the league tables is because other countries have fallen behind in the standards that they've created. So in the last year of the Conservative government, we saw an enormous plummet in children's attainment here in the UK.
Right.
And in maths in particular, which I know is a subject that successive education secretaries in your party, Laura, care about, and the previous Prime
Laura and
Minister.
Lisa, hang on, Laura.
Our children got the worst results in the last year of the Tory government since 2006.
Well, let's have a look at the graph.
Just because everybody else is doing worse,
Can I just
it doesn't mean that our children are doing better.
And just to underline what Lisa is saying, if you look at this graph, the average maths scores fall for all UK nations, but you can see there the drop in the performance in England and how much lower, it's true, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland were. But that is when the Conservatives were in power up until 2022. So, yes, it's true, England is doing relatively better, but that's because others have fallen even more steeply. But the fall, you can see there on the screen, England in the blue line, it's dropped dramatically too. So why is it that you are claiming such a great legacy when it comes to what you left in education?
Look at how fast England was going up there. And then obviously
Yeah, but it
COVID, yes, of course it dropped because education standards across the world dropped because of COVID, which is a really big issue that we're still grappling with. One of the big things that is still present in schools is the absence crisis, which, by the way, this bill does nothing to sort out
We are taking action to address, which you didn't when you were in government.
No, we were, but this bill does nothing to sort that out, and we would support it if there were measures in there to bring it forward, because we need to do more to make sure that children are back into the classrooms. There is an over-representation of deprived children outside of school at the moment. That needs to be fixed. But no, it does not. It abolishes academies in all but names.
No, it doesn't.
It is a disaster because it will turn around the success we've had on a cross-party basis.
You just said something that's actually quite astonishing. You've said that if the bill took measures to address this, then you would support it.
Yeah.
But the truth is, we've just had this horrendous case of a child who was taken out of school, many children taken out of school during
That's
COVID.
Homeschooling. That's homeschooling.
Did not return.
We're supporting...
Hang on. Are you disputing the fact that this bill addresses that issue and could have prevented the appalling murder of a little girl in this country?
So you're talking about
Why are you opposing measures that would deal with that? It is genuinely disgraceful.
No, homeschooling is different from absence. So the homeschooling measures, which absolutely we are supporting, where they stop a child who is under a social work provision, we support.
But
it's a good measure,
because that's not
this
legislation.
But this is the point.
Those
are the
measures to keep children
I've been
safe.
very clear from the beginning. Those are the safeguarding measures. We were absolutely behind.
All right.
But the measures on schools are wrong.
Can I just
wrong. Bring back the bill without the education.
Right. Okay. But Laura, on the legacy question. Is it really something to crow about, the legacy of the last Conservative government, when 20%, almost 20% of children were persistently absent? I mean, does it really matter if we're a bit higher internationally, if 20% of kids aren't going to school? That's your legacy.
That absence is a massive problem that we need to do something about.
And shouldn't that just be the thing you're focusing on?
That should be the focus of this government right now. I completely agree. What they should not be doing is abolishing academies in all but name, undermining the thing that has made the system in England so successful. That is a cross-party miracle. It was started by the Labour Party. It's been supported and turbocharged under the Conservatives. It's had huge results. Why undermine it?
You're right.
Focus on absence.
Saying that you didn't think the Education Secretary had read the bill. It's very clear that you haven't read the bill. And you haven't paid any attention to what we're doing.
But hang on.
Attendance was the first thing that the Education Secretary put on the agenda of this government. And you talk
but
as
in the
if
bill,
you weren't
in the bill.
government.
No, but
20% of children persistently absent from school. I would be hanging my head in shame if I were
But then
doing that.
what's happened to the
Lisa?
presentation of this bill, Lisa? I mean, if it was so clear, then why is it we've had to discuss it, debate it, in terms of what's actually in the bill and what it will or won't do?
And also the fact there are Labour MPs who are concerned about this. It's not just Siobhan McDonagh. There are others who don't really understand why the academy thing was needed and why it was put in this bill as well.
There are MPs across the board who have different views on this. Myself, I was on the Education Selective Committee when I was first elected to Parliament, and I can tell you there isn't one uniform view across everybody in Parliament, and there shouldn't be either. This is how bills work. We take them to the House, we set out the intention, and then MPs and peers scrutinise them and help to improve them. I think that's absolutely right. I make no apology for the fact that we brought forward a measure clarifying the measures on pay, and I would genuinely expect the Conservative Party to welcome that. That's us being a responsible government, listening to people's concerns about the drafting of legislation and working with the House to get it right. But what you cannot argue is that this bill does anything other than address 14 years of Conservative failure.
I can argue that. I absolutely can argue that. No, what it does is it reverses 2 decades of cross-party consensus on what improves schools, and it will undermine it.
All right, well, let's just move on to this story because for those who've been following it, a massive victory for Prince Harry today. If you have a look at the headline in The Guardian, Prince Harry settles legal claim against The Sun publisher. There was a statement earlier from Prince Harry's lawyer after the publishers of The Sun apologised to him and Tom Watson for unlawful activity at the newspaper in pursuit of stories. Let's just have a listen to his lawyer.
The rule of law must now run its full course. Prince Harry and Tom Watson join others in calling for the police and Parliament to investigate not only the unlawful activity now finally admitted, but the perjury and cover-ups along the way.
What's your reaction, Lisa?
Well, on a personal level, I know Tom very well, and I've done some work with Prince Harry. I feel very relieved for them that this long ordeal is over, and that they've consistently asked for an apology, and I feel very pleased and relieved for them that now this chapter is finished. I met recently with some of the families who are involved in the campaign group Hacked Off to listen to some of their stories. I have to say, actually, my successor in the job from the previous Conservative government had also met with them. They've met with a number of Secretaries of State. I think there's no question across government that we do take that really seriously. The stories that they told were absolutely harrowing. We've got to strike the right balance between a free and fair press, which is an absolute cornerstone of democracy, and the ability to protect people, like some of the families I heard from who'd gone through hell when they'd lost loved ones.
Right.
We're looking at this across government. We'd like there to be a cross-party consensus about it, but we, like the last government did, we do take it seriously.
What about a parliamentary inquiry? That's what the lawyer is calling for because it's been settled. It was a civil case, but there has been admission of criminal activity. You heard the lawyer there saying they would like a police investigation. Should there be a parliamentary inquiry? Will you call for it?
Well, I'm not going to call for a parliamentary inquiry. I think what Parliament does is a matter for Parliament, and it exists to hold us to account. If the Select Committee, for example, decides that they want to hold an inquiry, I'm sure the families would very much welcome that. From our part in government, it's our job to meet the families, listen to their concerns and see what we can do to help to protect people from the more egregious practices, whilst making sure that we don't in any sense encroach on the right of a free and fair press in this country.
Your reaction, Laura?
I think what Lisa is saying, I think, is sensible and measured, and we'll have to see what the government bring forward.
All right, let's talk about Heathrow and a third runway. There's a lot of chat about it because the Chancellor has been asked for her approval, or whether she does approve of a third runway. She didn't specifically say that, but it does look as if an announcement will be made next week. If you have a look at this headline in The Independent, Reeves risks cabinet row as she says growth must trump green concerns over Heathrow third runway. Give us a little bit of background to this, Vicki, because it's a long-running affair.
It certainly is, and you can't help but remember Boris Johnson saying he was going to lay down in front of...
famously or infamously, yes.
So this is, been going on a long time. Now, what's changed now, of course, is we have a government that is pretty desperate for growth, and expanding Heathrow would be one of the ways to do that. But as you say, there is not agreement across the cabinet. And in the past, of course, the other side to this has been environmental campaigners saying, you know, basically concreting over West London is not what you need to do. So Ed Miliband, of course, the Environment Secretary, you know, has previously been against it. So have many others in the cabinet who voted against it previously, including Sir Keir Starmer. And so it will be interesting to see where this goes. But it is pretty clear, as you say, from Rachel Reeves, she's not confirming it, but it looks pretty likely she's going to announce it next week and saying pretty bluntly, the answer can't always be no when it comes to development. And this is a sign, I think, of how much the government needs the growth. Obviously has upset businesses with the rise in taxation and is trying to pull levers here, I think, to boost the economy. Deregulation, another one of those things, which is, trying to come at it from a very different angle. Will be very interesting to see how the rest of the government responds to that.
Well, let's find out. Lisa and Andy, you were nodding away there when Vicki was quoting the fact that Rachel Reeves is saying you can't just continually say no to these projects, but you did say no. Yeah. You voted against a third runway in 2018. Have you changed your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I remember coming on this show and having a real grilling from you about it, actually.
Oh, I do hope so.
To get very bad flashbacks to that day. But I did, and I think I explained at the time, Jo, that I voted against it because of concerns about air pollution. When I was in my early 20s, I lived briefly in London, and I was a councillor in Hammersmith, where a lot of problems with air pollution already existed and continue to exist. But we've been really clear as a government. We were elected on a promise to stabilise and grow the economy, and all of our other commitments rest on that. We have to create the growth that will fund the National Health Service and the other things that we've committed to do. Recently we decided to expand London City Airport, and we did so on the condition that it met very, very stringent requirements on air pollution, noise pollution and climate change and our net zero commitments. We've shown through the example of London City Airport that it's possible to meet those standards and to have economic growth and to press forward with those measures.
But Lisa, London City Airport is not the same as Heathrow and a third runway there. Are you saying that now your concerns, your earlier concerns about air pollution are no longer at the forefront of your mind because you so badly need this growth?
No, and actually at the time, one of the things that we discussed was that the expansion of Heathrow isn't just good for the economy in London and the South East, it also has benefits for the economy in other parts of the country, including Greater Manchester, where I'm a Member of Parliament, because it enables more flights between Manchester and London. But always, as a government, we will balance that against environmental considerations and around net zero.
So if they don't meet it, you will say no to a third runway?
We will make sure that those measures are met. That is non-negotiable. Those are very strict standards written into law. And as we did with London City Airport, we will not approve unless those conditions are met. But we're confident that we can do it. And what the Chancellor was saying in Davos today is that for too long there have been too many excuses. We have to grow the economy. We have to press forward on our net zero commitments. We have to protect the environment. And we are determined to do all.
Did the last Conservative government just give in to all the excuses, to use Lisa's words before, when it comes to blocking this sort of expansion?
Well, it's about time that Rachel Reeves did something positive for the economy, so I am very pleased with this decision and I hope she pushes it forward.
Right. Why do you think it wasn't actually pursued by previous Conservative governments? We've cited Boris Johnson. I think he was away, actually, for the vote, or managed to find himself somewhere else in the world when there was a vote in the Commons about it. Do you think that was the wrong decision to try and block it?
Well, I think we voted it through overall.
But it didn't happen in the end,
Yeah,
did
I mean,
it?
these things do take too long. I think there's cross-party agreement on that.
I mean, the other point is Sadiq Khan, the London Mayor, Labour London Mayor, is also against it.
Yes.
And, I mean, they could get to the situation where there's legal action.
I think he has said that he would take legal action if this was to
And
go
what's your
ahead.
message to him?
Look, that's absolutely right and proper, that as a mayor with devolved
A Labour
authority,
London mayor,
that he does what he thinks is right. But if the government has to grow this economy and start to get this country back on its feet again, we were elected on a commitment to do that, and we won't let anything stand.
You won't let Sadiq Khan stand in your way.
We're an elected government. It is right that we fulfil the promises that we made to the British people, and we fully intend to do.
But what about the commitments and the promises that you've made over your environmental and climate change policies? If I just show you this in the Times, Labour strips environmental quangos of powers to delay house building. Are you just abandoning action, really, on climate and the environment in order to get growth?
No, but what we're doing is tearing down needless regulations that stand in that way. Laura just said something that I couldn't agree with more about. These things just take far too long. It costs us investment, it costs us decent housing for people, it costs this country a great deal. It's something actually that the last Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, Michael Gove, talked endlessly about, was the number of bureaucratic hurdles that stand in the way of actually getting things done. We believe that we're far better off solving these problems at the outset, taking communities with us and getting it done.
But as Laura said, these things do take time and they are difficult. What advice would you give to this government to bulldoze over political opposition?
I think on big infrastructure, national infrastructure projects, there is cross-party consensus that these are taking too long and need speeding up. I would say that when we, for example, tried to push through nutrient neutrality laws last time round, they were opposed by Labour and fell off. So let's see. I think there's a little bit of game playing here, but we will openly and honestly support where we think it's in the best interest.
Would you criticise President Trump for withdrawing the US from the Paris Agreement?
Well, it would be in the world's interest, I believe, and we believe as a government, for the US to be part of that agreement. But he is an elected president. The US will chart its own course. We make no apology for charting ours.
That's all we have time for today. Thank you very much to all of my guests. I'll be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and the iPlayer. Please join me then. Bye.